"End her training," he ordered. But the injured recruit took down 12 Marines and shocked everyone. The training ground was cold, the kind of cold that settles into your bones even through a uniform. A group of recruits stood in formation, boots pressed into the wet dirt, shoulders squared, eyes straight ahead. They had been at it since 4 in the morning. Nobody was talking. Nobody was allowed to. And standing somewhere in that line, trying very hard not to let the pain show on her face, was a young woman who had spent the last several weeks quietly fighting a battle that nobody in that formation knew anything about. She had joined the Marine Corps because she believed she belonged there, not to make a statement, not to show the world something, not to prove a point to anyone who doubted her. She had grown up in a house where service was just what people did. Dinner table conversations about discipline and duty, about what it means to keep going when your body has already decided it is finished. She had soaked all of it in, quietly, for years. She had wanted this life for as long as she could remember, and when she finally got the chance to step into it, she took it without hesitating. Boot camp is not easy for anyone. That is, in fact, the entire point of it. But she had moved through the first weeks with a steady kind of confidence that was hard to ignore. She was not the loudest person in the room. She was not looking for recognition. She just came in every day, kept her head down, did everything that was asked of her, and then did a little more. Some of her instructors noticed and respected it. Others saw someone worth testing. That is the thing about certain kinds of environments. Quiet competence can make some people feel, without being able to explain why, unsettled. The senior drill instructor was the kind of man who had been doing this job for a very long time. He had seen hundreds of recruits come through. He had a way of sizing people up in the first few days that he probably believed was accurate, and most of the time he was not wrong. He looked at her early on, and made a decision that had very little to do with what she was actually doing in training, and a great deal to do with what he already believed before she arrived. He decided she was going to be a problem, not because she was failing, but because she was not, and something about that did not sit right with him. The comments started in the first few weeks. Small things, the kind that slide just under the line of what you can formally report, but sit heavy in your chest for hours afterward. Remarks about standards, about whether certain people truly belonged in this environment, about the way things used to be done. She heard every one of them. She did not respond to a single one. She just ran faster, did more, showed up earlier. Every time he expected her to flinch, she did not. Then, in week 4, something went wrong. It was a night obstacle course, a rope climb followed by a descent in the dark, with wet boots and tired arms, and not enough light to see the ground clearly. She went up fine. Coming down, the angle was wrong by just a few inches, and when she landed, something in her left shoulder gave way. Not a pop exactly, more like a tearing, deep inside the joint. That sharp, electric kind of pain that arrives all at once, and then keeps sending small reminders every time you breathe. She knew immediately what it was. She had read enough about training injuries to recognize a torn labrum, without needing a doctor to tell her. She said nothing. The woman in the bunk next to hers noticed within a day. This was another recruit, a quiet and practical person who had grown up doing physical work and had a particular talent for reading people. She noticed the way the injured girl dressed in the mornings now, one-handed movements, disguised as casual habits. She waited until they were alone, and asked directly whether everything was all right. The answer she got was not exactly a lie, but it was not the truth either. And then came the quiet request, "Please do not say anything." So she did not. What followed was almost 3 full weeks of something that deserved a different name than training. Every push-up was a negotiation between what her body could do and what her mind was demanding of it. Every time she raised equipment, she made adjustments that were invisible to anyone not looking for them. She slept with ice tucked inside her jacket. She learned, through trial and a great deal of quiet pain, exactly which movements she could power through with her right side compensating, and which ones she needed to restructure entirely so that nobody watching would see a difference. She became an expert at functioning within a limitation she was not allowed to acknowledge. She got very good at it. A camp medic flagged her during a routine check, noted shoulder soreness, recommended limited activity for a period. She filled out the form, thanked him for his time, and walked back to the barracks. She did not fill out the separation paperwork that had been left with the form. She left it on the desk and went to bed. The final integrated combat assessment was scheduled for a Friday. This was the evaluation that mattered most. A series of defensive takedown drills, where each recruit would face a rotation of active-duty Marine evaluators in hand-to-hand sequences, timed and scored. The purpose was not to find out who was the strongest person in the room. It was to find out who had actually absorbed what they had been taught, whether the training had become instinct, whether a person could think clearly and move correctly when someone larger and more experienced was coming at them with intention. He did this in front of everyone. He called her name. He stepped into the center of the formation with the file in his hand. In front of every recruit and every evaluator, and a senior officer who had come to oversee the proceedings, he said what he had, by this point, apparently been building toward for weeks. He said she was a liability. He said her presence in the assessment was an insult to the recruits who had prepared without injury. He ordered her to stand down, pack her gear, and report immediately for administrative separation processing. He spoke with the certainty of a man who had already made the decision and was simply announcing it to the people it affected. He did not say any of this gently. He did not say any of it as though he was worried about her health. The formation did not move. Nobody said anything. The senior officer stood at the rear of the group, with his arms folded, watching. She did not move either. A few seconds passed. Then she spoke. She spoke quietly, without the kind of edge that would have made it easy to dismiss her. She asked one question. She asked whether the formal assessment had officially commenced. It had not. She then referenced, by specific number, a regulation from Marine Corps Administrative Policy. The regulation was clear. Assessment completion was required before separation proceedings could be formally initiated. The file could not be processed until the evaluation was on record. The regulation was real. The drill instructor either had not remembered it or had not believed she would know it. The pause that followed was the kind that fills a room in a way that is difficult to describe, but very easy to feel. The senior officer said nothing, but something shifted in the way he was standing. A medic was brought over. A voluntary participation waiver was drawn up. the kind that exists precisely for situations where a person chooses to continue with an activity, despite a known physical condition, and takes responsibility for that choice. She read through it completely. She signed it. She handed it back. Nobody in that formation believed she would make it past the second or third round. The assessment began. The first evaluator approached with the easy confidence of someone who has done this many times and knows roughly how it ends. She did not meet him directly. She moved to the side, found an angle he had not prepared for, and redirected his own forward momentum into the mat. The whole thing was over quickly. Much more quickly than the people watching had assumed it would be. By the third round, the observers had gone quiet in a different way. The casual background conversations had stopped. Instructors who had been standing loosely had straightened up. Something about what they were watching was making people pay closer attention than they had planned to. She was not winning through force. That was the detail that made this difficult to look away from. Every evaluator she faced was heavier than her. Most were significantly stronger. She was not trying to overpower any of them. She was watching, finding the small window in each exchange, the fraction of a second where a slight shift in her position could use the other person's size against them, rather than competing with it. She had been paying very close attention all through training, it turned out, possibly more attention than anyone had realized, and possibly sharpened by the fact that she had been managing a damaged shoulder for weeks. When something is taken away from you, you find other tools faster. Between rounds 5 and 6, she pressed her back against the wall for a moment. Her bunkmate, watching from the line of recruits, understood what she was seeing. She did not look away. There was nothing to say that would have helped, so she said nothing. And then the girl with the torn shoulder stood back up and walked back onto the mat. The 10th evaluator was more difficult. He was seasoned, and he adapted when she adapted, which extended the exchange and cost her more than the earlier rounds had. She still got him down, but when she stood up afterward, the way she was breathing told anyone watching closely that the margins were getting thinner. She kept going. The 12th man was a drill instructor himself, more than 10 years of service. He had been part of assessments like this before, on the other side of them. He came in with adjustments already made, prepared for someone who was going to be unpredictable. What he had perhaps not fully anticipated was that by this point, she had spent the entire morning building a very detailed picture of how each person moved, where each person was slowest to recover, what kind of pressure made different types of people commit too early. She had 12 observations, and she used all of them. The exchange lasted 47 seconds. He went down. The room did not react the way rooms usually do when something unexpected happens. There was no shouting, no applause. What there was instead was a silence that stretched out about 2 seconds longer than silence normally does, and in that extra 2 seconds was something that could not really be put into words, but that every person standing there felt in some form. It was the feeling of having to update a conclusion you had already reached. The senior officer uncrossed his arms. He walked across the mat. He picked up the evaluation board himself and completed the scoring. When the final numbers were recorded, she had the highest tactical efficiency marks in the entire training cycle. Not the highest among a subset, the highest overall. She went to the infirmary. The imaging showed what she already knew. Surgery was 2 days later. She did not ask, during any of that, whether she had passed. She had been in that room. She already knew the answer. The shoulder healed. Rehabilitation took several months, and there were days in the middle of it when the joint ached in a way that brought everything back clearly. The cold morning. The formation. The silence before she asked her question. She probably thought about many things on those days. Afterward, the drill instructor pushed for a change to assessment protocols that would have removed the option for voluntary injury waivers. The proposal was overruled by base command within a month. The senior officer filed a formal commendation that was added to her permanent record. People talked about what had happened for a while, the way you talk about something that does not fit neatly into what you thought you already understood, and then, as people do, they moved on. She finished her recovery. She returned to training. She graduated. There was no particular ceremony around the story, no moment where it was acknowledged officially and made into something larger than itself. Just the work, completed. Running it alone. No audience. No instructor. No one watching or timing or taking notes. Just her and the course, and the reason she had shown up every single day, which had never really had anything to do with the people who doubted her. It had always just been about this.